Hello, this is Dr. Paul Cottrell, and I am recording this on May 19th. We're going to go over the news briefly, and I'll give you my opinion about what's going on. But to set the the table here, we're going to go over the Ebola outbreak, the Hantavirus outbreak, and how Trump is backing off with retaliation, at least in the near term, against Iran. We're going to survey the news, and I'll give you my opinion. Please help support the work that I do by going to my store and getting the great products that I offer, and follow my advice, which is advice that I follow every day. Now, also, you can help support the work by sharing the links, asking your social media to follow me. You can follow me on YouTube, Brighteon, Bitchute, and Rumble, TikTok, Substack, Patreon, buy me a coffee. There's many ways to follow my work. You can also watch live streams on my website, read generated articles under broadcast paper on my website, and listen to archived audio podcasts. You can also listen to my podcasts on Podomatic and Apple Podcasts. So please help support the work that I do by making sure you subscribe and being a paid member. All this work that I do is for free to help to inform you so you don't flip out, but also how you can benefit from it, either by preparing or by seeing certain opportunities that arise in the market, in the financial markets. So please help by donating. On my website, you can donate through Stripe, PayPal, or buy me a coffee. You can be a paid member to my Substack channel and my Patreon channel. Those are great ways to help support the work that I do. Again, all these videos are for free. So please help support the work that I do. All right, with that, we're going to start with the Ebola outbreak. This is France 24. Now, I want to preface, there are three different versions, basically, three different main versions of Ebola. This one that is popping up is a little bit more of a rare version of it. There are companies like Moderna that's working on multi-variant inoculations. There's no monoclonal antibodies to this version. But when it comes to Ebola in general, and this includes the Zaire and the Sudan strains, these outbreaks are typically in Africa. They're around the Congo region, the Republic of Congo, and or adjacent countries to the Congo. And it's been flaring up for decades. And then it dies down, and it flares up again, and it dies down. So I don't want you to get panicky about this being some sort of pandemic. It's not. Ebola is not a pandemic. It can't be a pandemic because it's fluid to fluid transmission. So eventually it dies out. But proper hygiene in the region of the outbreak is super important. And a lot of these areas don't have running water. So a great way to improve the health of the society is actually just to have better hygiene. But this is not a pandemic. Now, some people out there may think, well, this is some sort of weaponized system that was released. This is an endemic situation that is flaring up, and then it dies down, it flares up, and it dies down. Now, there's research being done in the laboratory that does gain of function research. But this is not a lab leak. This is not a forced release. This is an endemic situation that is starting to cause an outbreak, but eventually it's going to die down. And that's why I'm not too concerned about it. Now, in terms of the hantavirus, that's also, there's gain of function research happening in the laboratory. What it looks like, based on the current evidence, is that this is just the endemic version of Andes, and it's going to die out. But it will spread a little bit easier than Ebola. All right, so you may have a group of people that are infected that are tangential to the actual passengers in the boat, but it will die out. It's not a pandemic. I'm not too worried about it. I am worried about the gain of function research with hantavirus because that's a low version of a respiratory virus, what's called a category C. So that's not the case with Ebola. Ebola is really bad if you get it, but it's hard to get it, especially if you're not around the environment where there's the outbreak. Now, it's easy to get if you are touching the fluid of the patient. And this is the reason why a lot of healthcare workers end up getting it. And that's what has happened recently. So with that, let's begin with Ebola. Again, it's not a pandemic, and this will eventually die down. And this has been happening for decades. It's been flaring up and then dies down, flares up and then dies down.
Why does Mike Bloomberg support Michael Asher? He helped pass our gun safety law. Governor Hochul, he stood up for abortion rights. Congressman Nadler, Lasher's keeping ICE out. That's why so many people we trust are endorsing Michael Asher.
Another risk factor.
Why does Mike Bloomberg support Michael Asher? He helped pass our gun safety law. Governor Hochul, he stood up for abortion rights. Congressman Nadler, Lasher's keeping ICE out.
So basically, let me go off on a tangent. So they want to destroy your Second Amendment. They want to kill fetuses, and they want to support illegal immigration. That's the Democratic Party for you. And that's why that's why former Mayor Bloomberg is supporting him.
Endorsing Michael Asher.
Real work. It's the pitch that lands the client, the journey that captures new markets, and the breakthrough that shapes an industry. But it's not. And another risk factor of.
Why does Mike Bloomberg support Michael Asher? He helped pass our gun safety law. Governor Hochul, he stood up for abortion rights. Congressman Nadler.
This is apropos. Medical personnel are tonight rushing to the front lines of a fresh Ebola outbreak in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, where the late detection and quick spread of the virus are alarming health experts. At least 100 deaths have been reported, with hundreds more cases suspected. An American missionary is among those who've tested positive for the virus. August Atkinson has the latest.
The Democratic Republic of the Congo is sounding the alarm. The strain of the Ebola virus currently circulating has already caused nearly 100 deaths, and health officials say there is currently no vaccine specifically targeting this strain.
We know that hospitals are already under pressure due to the number of patients, and that's from the public, as we currently have 59 patients who are receiving active care. However, we're preparing to set up treatment centres at the 3 sites in order to expand our capacity.
At Bunia Airport, the World Health Organization delivered emergency medical supplies and protective equipment.
This equipment certainly won't be enough. What we've done is just the first step. We've depleted our stock in Kinshasa and brought it here.
The resurgence of Ebola in the Ituri province, which borders Uganda, was one of the main topics at the 79th World Health Assembly in Geneva.
Yesterday, I declared a public health emergency of the international concern over the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of the Congo that has already spread to Uganda. We live in difficult and dangerous and divisive times.
Ebola causes a highly contagious hemorrhagic fever. The virus has killed more than 15,000 people across Africa over the past 50 years. Around 350 suspected cases have been reported in the DRC. Most patients are between 20 and 39 years old, and 60% are women. The current strain of the virus is known as the Bundibugyo variant, which has already caused 2 previous outbreaks in Uganda in 2007 and in the DRC in 2012.
With more, we're joined now by Mohammed Munir, Professor in Virology at Lancaster.
It's really
University.
important.
Thanks so much.
It's really important to pay attention that this is not going to be a pandemic. This is going to be localized in that region, and it's fluid-to-fluid transmission. If you catch it, you could die. It's probably a 40% chance of dying. A big part of the survival rate is making sure that you sustain fluids and you have proper hygiene, especially in the containment area. But, it has a high fatality rate. But it's not something that will spread around the world. Why? Because it's not a respiratory. Now, this is the reason why I keep on saying people need to pay attention to the gain of function research. Because not only could you improve the infectivity and the pathogenesis of a pathogen by doing research in the laboratory and giving it function, but you can give it super function, super gain of function, where instead of it being just fluid to fluid, you can design it where it can actually be respiratory. Now just imagine using a respiratory virus and packaging in or mutating it in such a way where it has many functions or all the functions of a blood disease or a fluid transmission virus. What if you package a respiratory virus with HIV? Or what if you designed a virus that was respiratory at the very beginning and then ended up becoming Ebola? Now, that kind of research is happening in the laboratory. It's not out there. It's not floating around in the wild. It's in the freezer. Research is being done to do this. There's the problem. This ain't it. The Hantavirus actual outbreak, that's not it. Be wary of fluid transmission genomes, such as HIV or Ebola, ending up being packaged in pieces of it or all of it being packaged into a respiratory vector. And you release that. Now you got a problem. And this is being done. This research is being done. But this ain't the problem. So don't worry about it.
With us on the program, Professor. Firstly, tell us a little bit more about this particular strain of Ebola. What are the symptoms? How contagious is it?
If we look onto Ebola viruses, there are at least 5 different types of Ebola viruses. One of them is called Bundibugyo virus. This is relatively uncommon, rare. Only 2 times have caused outbreak before.
There's really 3 main ones, but you said it 5, right? But there's 3 main ones you can pay attention to.
Almost all of the Ebola viruses, they start with fever, muscle ache, vomiting, diarrhea, which are a very common symptom for many of the diseases. But in particular case of the Ebola virus, when the disease progress,
because you're losing lots of fluids, right, through excretion, and you have your vascular system is starting to bleed out because it's more permeable, what happens is your blood pressure starts to drop because you don't have blood volume. Well, if you can catch it early and make sure that fluids are maintained, you have a better chance of survival. On top of proper hygiene and proper PPE and all that. Because you don't want to cross-contaminate and keep on reinfecting.
Result is that the majority of the openings of the body, like ear, nose, mouth, start bleeding, and that is a very pathognomonic, which is a very characteristic feature of the Ebola viruses. So that is the time when the majority of the people who are either in the deceased person's funeral or in the healthcare setting of the disease of this diseased person or the sickened person treating them catch the infection. So mainly the virus spread through the bodily fluids such as semen, saliva, or the blood, or the vomit when it comes out of the deceased or the sick person.
And do we know if this strain of the disease is more dangerous, and how do you treat it if there's no vaccine and there isn't really any drug treatment?
Another thing that people need to pay attention to is that you can that Ebola can be in an immune protective environment in the body. It has been found that people that have survived Ebola is still in the eye, inside the eye, with the vitreous fluid. It's in the eye. And it's in the joints because some of these areas are immunoprotective. Now, in the semen, as he said, Ebola can be transmitted through sexual intercourse, but same thing for Hantavirus. And with Hantavirus, it can be dormant within the male reproductive tract for 71 months. 71 months. Now, okay. Now think about that. You are on a ship, you contract the hantavirus, and then you survive it, but it's still in your body. You haven't fully cleared it. And if you're a male, you can transmit it to someone else within 71 months. Now, that can cause a little bit of a problem. Because now hantavirus is sexually transmitted over a 71-month period. Now, 71 months is a lot of months.
Either.
That's a very important question. So basically, if we look on to the previous outbreaks of this particular strain of the Ebola virus called Bundibugyo, there have been only 2 outbreaks. And based on that one, it is less pathogenic compared to the 2 most common Ebola strains, which are Zaire and Sudan Ebola viruses. Around 27% people who have been infected with Bundibugyo, they have died. But Bundibugyo strain of the Ebola virus only shares 60% of the genetics commonalities with the Zaire and the Sudan Ebola viruses, which were very common. So majority of the vaccine, the treatment, and the test to detect the infection for common type of Ebola viruses are unfortunately not sufficient to detect, to treat, to vaccinate against Bundibugyo viruses.
And why do you think there's this initial delay in detecting the presence of Ebola here? It's believed that the virus might have been circulating for weeks before it was first detected back in April.
Absolutely. I think there are 2 main reasons. Number 1 reason is that the initial symptoms of the Ebola.
It's lack of funding. And that's another thing you need to pay attention to when it comes to these outbreaks. The WHO is going to ramp this up a little bit more than what it really is to try to get donations to NGOs and also to try to push the Americans to donate and pay into the WHO, because remember, we withdrew from the WHO.
Is not the same for any infection. So those can go unnoticed quite clearly. And majority of the people in that part of the world, they first go into the witchcrafts or some of the prayer areas and get the treatment from there until they really notify to their health authorities when the situation is already very aggravated. And number two is that the tests that initially were deployed for this strain of the Ebola virus were not really meant for this strain of Ebola virus. So therefore, those were tested negative, which were actually positive. So it only came to know when they started sequencing the strain, and then they identified that it is a new virus. So therefore, overall, the delay had led to spreading of the infections under the carpet, and now I think a lot more cases that have already been identified.
Yeah, I was going to ask you as well, if it took so long, relatively speaking, to detect the virus, can we be sure really how big the current outbreak might actually be, and how many contact cases there could be potentially as well?
Absolutely. This is also a very important question, and we don't really know yet what is the scale of the outbreak. But what we do know is that the scale of the outbreak is way bigger than and larger than what we are having now. And that is the reason World Health Organization decided.
I agree with it. I think the scale of the outbreak in the Congo and in some of the bordering countries, it's bigger than what is announced right now, because it's opaque in terms of knowing what the real data is. But this is not a pandemic. This is not a pandemic, all right? Don't worry about it. If you're in the United States or if you're in Europe, you really don't have anything to really worry about. It would be super rare for you to get this. Now, if you're a healthcare worker in the Congo, in an outbreak area, you got a problem.
Emergency of international concern. And you can imagine also by the fact that people who were traveling from DRC into Uganda, Kampala, for example, is around 1,200 kilometers away from actually where the hub of this outbreak has been. And those people, one of them has unfortunately died, and the spread is gone beyond Uganda. In, for example, Rwanda is another target for this outbreak. So more of the uncontrolled and porous border are open, more chances for this virus to spread, unfortunately.
And another risk factor, obviously, the violence in the region. How hard do you think it's going to be to get help to where it's most needed? Armed conflict, also general distrust are said to be hampering containment efforts generally.
Absolutely, and I think this is probably the most important aspect for controlling Ebola virus. And as we all know, that Ebola virus outbreak in DRC and a broader context of Africa is not a new thing. I mean, we have had at least 40 different outbreaks of the Ebola viruses since its first identification back in 1976. And out of those, 17 has been in DRC. And there are several reasons for that. One of the major reasons is that the bat population, which is a reservoir, which is the carrier of the Ebola viruses, they are very common in the DRC and part of the Central Africa throughout the length of that as well. And then other aspect is that the borders are porous. Overall health infrastructure is quite poor. And other than that is the political instability. All of these factors are precipitating and unfortunately would have a negative impact onto the outbreak moving forward.
And Professor, as well, we're hearing that a funeral procession has been linked to the outbreak. Local authorities there are saying as well that people seemingly believed the disease was a mystical illness and that there had been rumours that the area that it was initially spreading in was cursed. So what kind of a role do you think public health campaigns need to play here in providing information about how diseases as dangerous and potentially deadly as Ebola can spread?
Absolutely, and not only in this particular outbreak, in the previous outbreaks as well, the majority of the cases are either in and around funeral, family contacts, and in the ceremonies where the body is either being prepared for the funeral, and in the hospital setting where doctors are and the healthcare professionals are very close to the infected person. And this is the critical bit because for this particular strain of the Ebola virus, we don't have much options. We don't have treatments, we don't have vaccines, and some of the tests are also not the perfect tests. So we will be left with very few options, and those are we call non-pharmaceutical options, by which I mean is that the contact tracing, the isolation, proper awareness within the community, who to report to at the first instance, and making sure the people who are showing clinical sign, even if those are early clinical sign, they are properly documented and reported so that the spread within the community can be minimized.
And do you think this outbreak will be quickly contained? Difficult to say, of course, when so many questions remain. But is it likely, Professor, do you think that there is a chance that it might spiral into a repeat of what we saw here just over a decade ago?
But it is less likely that it would become a COVID-like pandemic for one particular reason is that the more deadlier the disease is, harder it is to spread. For example, the person who would be terminally infected with the
COVID. There were a lot of asymptomatic patients, and people were commingling. Then the spread would be more, the outbreak would be more. In addition, it's not a respiratory. But like I said, there are crazy researchers out there that are trying to make these types of pathogens airborne.
Coronavirus is going to be complete contrast to the COVID. Person starts showing so characteristic clinical sign like blood oozing out of all the opening of the person. Unfortunately, that person is not going to make it longer, but that also means the spread would be relatively harder compared to COVID or measles infection. So I'm not seeing this one as it become a global pandemic. But what I can see is that within the DRC, the neighboring countries and East Africa is going to certainly be a problem.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there for now, Professor. Thanks so much for being with us, though, on the program this week.
Which pathogens am I worried about causing a major problem that we would classify it as maybe disease X? A genetic shift in avian flu, Mpox, because it is starting to show signs of maybe becoming endemic in the homosexual community, and the rearing of a more lethal version of SARS. I'll call it SARS-CoV-3, or the fourth cocktail, or maybe even the fifth cocktail. That's what I'm worried about. I'm worried about SARS platform, avian flu platform, and Mpox platform. And I use the term platform for a reason. I'm not worried about Hantavirus, and I'm not worried about Ebola. As in the terms or in the context of pandemics. It's a problem in the Congo. It's a problem for the healthcare workers. So let's go to a video about an American doctor ending up testing positive here.
A doctor with ties to Richmond has tested positive for Ebola. Thanks for joining us here at 11. I'm Julie Bragg. Dr. Peter Stafford caught the virus while treating patients in Africa. Our Tracy Sears tells us more about the doctor's connections to VCU and what health experts are saying about the outbreak.
The American doctor working with a medical missionary organization in the Democratic Republic of the Congo who tested positive for Ebola has ties to the Richmond region. According to the missionary group Surge, Dr. Peter Stafford was exposed to the Bundibugyo Ebola virus while treating patients in the Congo city of Bunia. In the Congo and neighboring Uganda, there are more than 250 suspected cases and 80 suspected deaths so far in the Ebola outbreak, according to the World Health Organization. Before moving to Africa, Surge says Stafford and his family lived in Richmond, while Stafford completed his fellowship in burn surgery in 2022 at VCU Medical Center. Rebecca Stafford is also a doctor who works with the religious aid group. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Peter Stafford, Rebecca Stafford, their colleague Dr. Patrick LaRochelle, and the Stafford's 4 children are being taken to Germany for treatment and observation. The CDC says Peter Stafford is the only person currently showing symptoms after exposure to this particular strain of the Ebola virus.
They didn't test for this particular strain of Ebola, so it could have been going on for a few weeks. My concern is just this thing's big, and I think it's bigger than we realize.
Grace Tran was part of an Ebola response team that partnered with USAID before funding was eliminated by the Trump administration last year.
Response is very complicated, and there's a lot of training that has to go into it to make sure that response is done well. That funding disappeared. Funding for Ebola programs disappeared last year.
The outbreak, transmitted through bodily fluids, is only the 3rd known outbreak of this strain of the Ebola virus and has no vaccine or treatment. Now, the CDC says they have activated their emergency response teams or are headed to the DRC. The U.S. has also temporarily suspended entry into the United States for non-citizens who have traveled in the last 30 days to the DRC, Uganda, or South Sudan. Americans, however, are exempt. Julie?
Well,
Dearly beloved, we're gathered here today to celebrate.
the bottom line is this, even if, and I think the numbers are larger than what has been published right now because of the opacity of the actual outbreak, it's not going to be a pandemic. So don't worry about it. Even if you had a individual that contracted it, that was a healthcare worker or even someone traveling, and they end up getting into the United States and they become symptomatic, the people around them through contact tracing would be observed and isolated, and eventually this thing would die out. But there is this reality here that Ebola can be in a patient that survives in the eye and in the joints, and maybe even other tissues, but definitely in the eye and in the joints. Now, that doesn't mean that that person can pass it on, because it's kind of in a contained environment. And it's in an environment where the immune system doesn't go into. So it's a protective environment. All right. I wouldn't be surprised if Ebola is actually in the brain too, but I maybe some people have done research on that. I don't know. But it's definitely in the eye and definitely in the joints for many patients that have survived Ebola. All right. But not all. But how many tissue samples have been done on all surviving Ebola patients? Not that much. But the point here is this: the numbers are bigger. But don't be afraid. And what's going to happen is the WHO is going to use this and leverage it and create a stir in the media to try to get the US to fund more for operations in Africa. Now, my take is this: Africa should be funding their own operations. So I don't see why they need the international community. But Ebola is not going to be a pandemic. I'm not worried about Ebola. Even if some of it came into the United States, either because of healthcare workers or people traveling, whatever, because it'll become self-contained very quickly. All right, let's take a look at what's going on with Hantavirus. Now, for the ones that don't know, I did a 11-part series on Hantavirus. Watch it. I go through lots of details. I tell you what I'm worried about, what I'm not worried about. So please watch that series. It's Hantavirus, episode 1 through 11. All right. Let's listen into the new twist in Hantavirus outbreak as doctors examine false positives.
You gotta have the best to be the best.
They put the plate down like it's a piece of art. They make me feel that way.
The cruise ship linked to Hantavirus getting disinfected at a Dutch port as Canada confirms its first case linked to that outbreak. Our own Dr. Siegel got an exclusive look from the State Department of the plane that brought home the American passengers. He also spoke with a physician who was actually on the ship and tested negative after a false positive.
I've been on this boat for many, many weeks, and it's a small group, and you really start to feel like you're a family, because you're interacting with the same group of people over and over again. When I heard that a lady on board was ill, I just felt the need just to volunteer to the doctor. So very quickly, after I almost innocently just asked if I could be of help, it was clear that there was no medical presence on the boat anymore, and my involvement just kind of escalated from there.
Fox News senior medical analyst Dr. Mark Siegel is the author of The Miracles Among Us, How God's Grace Plays a Role in Healing, and he joins us now. Good morning to you, Dr. Siegel.
Hi, Ainsley. How are you?
Hi. Tell us what's happening in Canada. Canada has reported its first presumptive positive hantavirus case.
Well, I think that case is related directly to the people on the ship. You know, the problem with the ship was they went days, and Dr. Kornfeld just told me this yesterday. They didn't know it was Hanta right away. They didn't know. They knew people were getting sick, but they didn't know till May 2nd, and then they didn't know till May 4th that it was transmitting. So that led to passengers disembarking, and they've been doing a really good job tracking them and tracing them in something called contact tracing. But still, the genie, to some extent, was out of the bottle. Luckily, we're seeing very limited spread, and that explains the patient in Canada. The good news is we're not seeing a lot of this, and the more days that tick by, the better off this is. And Ainsley, I was very impressed with Dr. Kornfeld with what you just showed, where he talked about, I had limited resources on that boat. He raised his hand, he said to the ship's doctor, if you ever need anyone, remember on the plane, if you ever need anyone, well, the ship's doctor came down with Hanta. And he was a general practitioner. Kornfeld is an oncologist, so he knows what it's like to look into the eyes of very sick people and to reassure them. And if you can conquer their fears, you decrease the spread. And that was what he did. He's a hero.
You know, doctors are heroes. You take the oath and you always jump in to help. And it's amazing. And Dr. Stephen Kornfeld was just on this cruise. And when the doctor that was assigned to the cruise was sick and came down with Hanta, he stepped up to the plate, which was very, very selfless of him. Here's Dr. Kornfeld telling you what it was like, because he originally had that false positive test and he was experiencing some symptoms. Listen to this.
I had sweats, fatigue, some generalized body ache, a little headache, upper respiratory, very flu, generically using the term flu-like symptoms. There was a lot of debate over whether or not my earlier illness was Hanta. I never felt it was Hanta, and I'm talking early April. I never felt it was Hanta because the timing was off. I don't think I got exposed before I got on the boat. I was never in the right areas, and it was too quick after I got on the boat and exposed to the gentleman who initially had Hanta for me to get Hanta. But there was a lot of thoughts that maybe I had Hanta. When my antibody test came back negative, both IgG and IgM, then nobody felt that my original illness was Hanta, and it was simply the ship flu, as most ships get, and it passed around to a lot of us in early April.
I'm glad it actually wasn't Hanta. Dr. Siegel, what is your advice to people that have cruise booked for the summer?
I think that cruises are safe. And one of the things I want people to know is, look, this was the ship's doctor. And he was walking around handing out, personal protective equipment and reassuring people and interacting daily, making rounds, and he still didn't actually get it. You're not going to get it on a cruise ship. And the other thing I want everyone to know, and Kornfeld said this too, the State Department did a tremendous job, and we showed the photos, getting them out of the Canary Islands, the Americans, and over to Nebraska where they're being quarantined. and he was very impressed with the technology. But when he got to Nebraska, he was very impressed with the medical director's personal touch. And there we go again, Ainsley. The personal touch is what really matters. For people out there, the risk to the general public right now is close to zero. We're monitoring it very carefully. CDC is involved. HHS is involved. The WHO, European health authorities are involved. And Nebraska is doing a tremendous job, as I just saw when I was there.
Okay, Dr. Siegel, thank you so much for coming on with us. Great to see you.
Great to see you.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.
All right, we're going to play 2 other videos. One's about the actual quarantining that's taking place. And then Scarf Woman. She's being asked the question, is Hantavirus an STD? And like I said, once you have Hantavirus, it stays in the male reproductive tract for 71 months. So the answer is yes, but limited. But I said that, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, week and a half ago. Oh, this is one of those. Not a big fan of non-narrating videos, so let's go to Scarf Woman, Burks.
For more, we are joined by Dr. Deborah Birx, the former White House coronavirus response coordinator under President Trump. And Dr. Birx, really appreciate your perspective on all of this. And I do want to start with hantavirus tonight. We now have 16 more people in the U.S. being monitored for hantavirus, and they were actually exposed to the infected woman on a plane who later died. Do you believe that we have a handle on the number of people stateside potentially exposed to this? And do you expect that number will grow from 41?
No, I think we have a very good handle. I think CDC's done a great job tracking all of these individuals who were exposed. Remember, we did have that one woman who got on the plane in South Africa. They got that woman off that plane, but a significant number of people got exposed. Of course, we had the people exposed on the ship who are in Nebraska. And then we have people from around the world. And, you know, the Canadian, you just summarized that so well, the Canadian and the French woman, both of which are positive. But I think, as you can see, as it's tailing off, it's been over a week and we've had one positive. So I think we are through the really high count. I do think we have to figure out how we are going to isolate people when they've only been exposed and how we start using molecular tests that are very early sensitive, that would keep them to be able to be out of these containment units eventually and tested at home. Because every one of our states have hantavirus testing, because we have hantavirus throughout the United States. So a different strain, not the human to human transmission strain.
Are we prepared for the next pandemic?
You know, I think intellectually and theoretically we're prepared. But I think we have to dramatically change our guidance and our trust with the American people. And I think many countries have had a very good deep dive into what they could do better with the next pandemic based on the COVID response. I think we need to do that in the US. I think we need clear guidance of how to keep schools open with the next pandemic, how to use tests proactively.
I want to go over this slide here that they're publishing. This is from the Lancet. And hantavirus cases from 2000 to 2020, so over a 20-year period. And it shows that China and Korea are the bulk of the cases, 13,100. Russia, 7,300. Europe, 3,100. Now remember, there is the old world version and the new world version. So the old world version, there's a lot there's a much higher case load over a 20-year period. Now, in the New World, we're looking at North America 30, Panama 30, Brazil 100, Paraguay 30, Argentina and Chile 120. So much lower for the New World hantavirus.
US, I think we need clear guidance of how to keep schools open with the next pandemic, how to use tests proactively. That's what we did in the United States, and the southern schools and many universities were able to stay open. So we have solutions, but I think we need to really convince the American people on both sides of the people who are very concerned and the people who aren't concerned at all, that we have really looked at this and we know how to do this better.
This virus, hantavirus, an Andes strain in particular, is less contagious than COVID. That is good news. We have seen the Andes strain spread without direct contact, specifically tied to the largest outbreak so far in Argentina that started in 2018. We saw that it started with a man who was infected by rodents, but in all, about 6 of the 34 cases in that outbreak actually had no direct contact.
Now, again, this outbreak is not going to be a pandemic, and it's going to be contained, and it's going to die out in a few weeks. All right? Probably in a couple months, the Ebola outbreak will die down. So it's not going to be a big deal for most of the world. All right? But if you watch that hantavirus series that I created, 1 through 11, watch them all, you will get to understand that there has been gain-of-function research. And that you can make hantavirus more pathogenic, increase the infectivity and the lethality. Now, one way to do it is to have a certain type of mutation, 2 mutations in the GN and the GC region, which is the spike protein, the glycoprotein of the hantavirus. If you have those mutations, then you're going to end up being able to chaperone the actual genome and the spikes to the cell surface and have it packaged. Because the lipid bilayer of the virus actually uses the lipid bilayer from the cell, either through the Golgi apparatus membrane or through the cell surface membrane. But when you have these mutations, which they've already done in the laboratory, it will move the assembly closer to the surface of the cell, and therefore more viron will be released versus the Golgi apparatus pathway. That's step 1. Step 2 is that there is a Syrian rodent model that they studied the pathogenesis of the hantavirus because they manipulated this hamster to represent the human body. But certain versions of the Andes virus certain versions of the Andes virus have mutations in the replicase region, all right, in the polymerase, which is the RNA dependent polymerase. And this is important because this will multiply the genome and also code for the proteins. So if you have a lot of mutations in certain Andes viruses that are taken from blood from humans that have contracted the Andes virus, they'll notice that these mutations, when put into the into the Syrian hamster model, it doesn't show. It doesn't show the same effects. And therefore, the hamster doesn't seem to be showing signs of disease. It's asymptomatic. So there's the regions on the GNGC and this replicase region, specifically the M sequence and the L sequence, because it's a segmented genome. But when you have these mutations, you can literally take a sample from these individuals that have Andes, that have these mutations in the replicase region on the L segment, and put it through the Syrian hamster model. And because it doesn't show the same disease level as in a human, but the ones that are taken from the human, they had symptoms. They die, all right? You take this tissue, you take blood samples of this, and you put it through the hamster model, the Syrian hamster model, you can now serial passage it and end up having a potentially more lethal one when it's in the human. Okay? So the human can contract it from rodents, and because it's been serial passaged, it's asymptomatic. So now they've created a model that if you have certain Andes strain, you can actually supercharge it, because now they have a model that can be used to serial passage without causing disease in the animal. But it would cause disease in the human. All right. In addition, because they can take a certain version of the Andes that has been found in the reservoir of rodents, they know what that genomic makeup is, and they can swap certain regions of the replicase of the reservoir version and put it into the version that is from the blood of the humans. And so you're swapping genomes, one that's in the reservoir that can cause human disease and show symptoms in a Syrian hamster model. And one is showing disease in a human, but not in the Syrian hamster model. And when you swap this, and you take the L segment of the reservoir version and put it into the Andes samples that were from humans, and then put it into a Syrian model, then you'll show symptoms. All right, and you can study that. All right, so there's ways to manipulate these things. But while they're doing this, while they're doing these serial passages to understand what's going on with the pathology of these pathogens, it will lead to further function in attachment. All right. So now you can continually train. Like, for example, you can take the human version and continually train in the Syrian model and get it to attach to other receptors that are higher up in the respiratory tract. Esophagus, oropharynx, epithelium, other, not just deeper lung tissue. This is the reason why it's so hard to catch the hantavirus, is that it has to be deeper in the lung tissue to be able to attach to the protocanherin-1 receptor. So you can manipulate some of these genomes and swap them out, either the whole genome of certain Andes viruses that may be showing symptoms versus ones that don't, and play around with it to see what sort of things can emerge. If you're passing through an animal model that is asymptomatic, but you know that it is symptomatic in a human, you may go down the path of increasing the pathogenesis of the virus. You may also attenuate it. You have to do the experiment. But the point here is that they're playing around with this. So hantaviruses can be supercharged. And if it attaches the pro-cadherin 1 receptors better in the upper part of the respiratory tract, then you have something similar to what is happening with mutations that are starting to happen with avian flu. Because the reason why avian flu is so hard to get is it has to be deeper in the lung. You have to breathe it in and it has to attach deeper in the lung. But if it can attach higher up in the lung in the respiratory tract, then it's easier to catch. So you can manipulate these genomes and you can manipulate these serial passages to allow for these things to happen. Not only that, you can use AI, where you take a look at the actual docking of the pro-cadherin 1 receptor and modify the GN part of the GNGC spike to attach to a proto-cadherin that is higher up in the respiratory tract. And then when you know that, then you modify in the laboratory based on the AI recommendation, and then you test in tissues, in vivo and in vitro, to see if it's really happening. There's a lot of manipulation that can take place. But this is research that has already happened. It's happening and has already happened. We already know what the mutations need to be for the chaperoning of the assembly to the cell surface to allow more viron to be released. Well, when you have that, then it'll spread more in the body. When you have more viron, you'll have more shedding, and potentially more people will get it. And we know symptomatic and asymptomatic in animal models of Andes. Both of them cause pathogenesis in the human. So if we start swapping genomes or swapping certain areas of the replicase and allow it to be stronger, because think about it, sometimes when a virus goes into a population, it'll start to attenuate. Well, that's because the RNA-dependent RNA polymerase is not proofread and it's making mistakes. Well, when enough of this virus has multiplied and mutated, you may actually see that it doesn't produce its genome as effective, and therefore the viron load is less. This is the reason why it's so important to understand that certain mutations on the GNGC can lead to chaperoning to the cell surface to allow for more viron. Even when you have a replicase that isn't functioning as well as it should. But when you can add in a more functioning replicase, which is in the version of Andes that is symptomatic in hamsters, the Syrian hamster model, and you put that in, that replicase is better. Well, that would mean that you have more viron. And then you add in those mutations on the GC spike, and now it can spread more. And then you add in artificial intelligence that has a better attachment of the GNGC to the proto-cadherin 1 receptor, and voila, you have a more airborne virus. This is not out of the realm of possibility. These things are happening right now. in the laboratory. It's not something that's happening outside the laboratory. It's not in the wild right now. But there can be a lab leak someday. There can be someone that forcefully leaks it out. Who knows? It reminds me of the situation where with the SARS platform, it started in 2001, and the first case of it was in 2002. And it took a long time for it to rear its head as a pandemic. So this research on hantavirus, 10 years from now, may lead to a pandemic. Right now, it's not going to happen. But I just told you in the series, the hantavirus series, how to weaponize it. All right, let's listen to Scarf one. And another thing with hantavirus, independent of the research that's taking place in the laboratory, it can stay in the male reproductive system for 71 months and spread it. And you'd be asymptomatic. So you've caught hantavirus, you seem to have recovered, and it stays in the respiratory tract for 71 months. And you can pass it on. So it has a similarity to STD.
What do you make of this? And can the Andes virus perhaps spread a little more readily than we think?
Well, you know, we have not done a good job testing everybody who is exposed during these outbreaks. And then we would really understand, you know, we track people by symptoms, but we should never be tracking viruses through symptoms because we all get different symptoms. Some people may get very little symptoms and write it off and not know they have Hanta's virus, but be able to pass it on to others. We know that Hanta, like other respiratory viruses, can remain suspended in air, and we breathe it in, and you don't know that that person was infected that you're standing next to. So I think really we need to do a better job and stop tracking viruses through symptoms and start tracking viruses through molecular testing.
And meanwhile, the New York Post, among others, reporting that the Andes strain of hantavirus can survive in human semen up to 6 years. They're describing that this can essentially become a sexually transmitted infection. What do we need to do about this? Are there tests that will be able to detect this in hantavirus patients? Should this be a major concern going forward?
There are tests. And, we learned this. Remember when we had the Ebola cases in the United States and Europe from exposure in Africa?
Now, this is New York Post. Post this on the 15th. We're recording this on the 19th. All right? This News Nation was published 1 day ago. Now, my video about this, all right, once again, I am first about everything. I did a video on the hantavirus series that was going over this very issue, and it was just to prove my point. All right. This video by News Nation was published 1 day ago, as of this recording. New York Post publishes May 15th. All right. And I did my video about that the Andes virus RNA stays in the human semen for 71 months. And I did my video 9 days ago. And we're recording this on May 19th. So I said it on May 10th. I published it on May 10th. Once again, right, all the time, and always ahead of the curve. So when I say, if I get worried about something, you need to worry. All right? That's your bellwether. That's your weather vane. All right? Not someone else, not someone else's podcast, not some other doctor. If Dr. Paul Cottrell says worry, you worry. Don't worry about Hantavirus right now. Right now. And don't worry about Ebola. What you need to worry about is Mpox, SARS-CoV-2, and or a rearing of cases that I suspect of SARS-CoV-2 to increase in 2029 or in 2030. And worry about avian flu. Those are the things you need to worry about right now. Not Hantavirus and not Ebola. If I see some sort of information that gets me to be more concerned about other pathogens, I'll tell you. All you got to do is just listen. I'll tell you what is happening. Because most of these other podcasters, they don't know what they're talking about. Here, right here, I'm proving that I'm ahead of the curve. Once again, this time I was ahead of the curve by 10 days. But 10 days, 10 days, about 9 days ahead of News Nation and 5 days ahead of New York Post.
And then we started testing and finding what we call privileged reservoirs of the virus. And another place where it was found was the eye and the semen. And so now that we've gotten better molecular testings, we're able to find out where the
eye and the semen. What did I say about Ebola? These are regions that are immunoprotective. Now, there are other areas of the body, such as for SARS-CoV-2, you can't get rid of. So when someone clears SARS-CoV-2, no, you have a reservoir inside your body of it. All right? And that's primarily in the colon, but also in the adipose tissue and in certain M cells, especially M0 cells. But the point here is something could emerge that can be bad. And if you take it in the context of where humanity is going and the potential curse that is happening, you can see all these different variables starting to almost align and amplify the curse. Pathogenic problems, immune system problems, higher cancer rates, dementia issues. That's just dealing with pathogens. Then food insecurity because of the change with this El Nino and the fertilizer issue that is happening because of the Strait of Hormuz is closed. I think food security is going to get better for the world, or will food insecurity start to increase? It's the latter, not the former. Food insecurity is going to increase. So you're going to have weather pattern changes. They're going to be wetter in some regions and drier in others. It's going to affect food crop yields. The lack of fertilizer is also going to affect food crop yields. In addition, you got to feed the cows something. So cow prices, the actual beef prices are going to skyrocket on top of the problem that we have with cattle ranchers and butchers. So food costs are going to go up. Then the baked in inflation because of the Strait of Hormuz being closed, downstream products that are from the petrochemical industry are going to go up. Gasoline is going to go up. And that's going to feed into many other goods and services. So inflation is getting baked in. And that inflation is never going to come back down. You're going to have inflation rate and the actual cost of goods. The actual cost of goods, which is inflation relative to some sort of benchmark, that is going to be permanent. The inflation rate year over year will fluctuate. It's going to go up and then it'll come back down. But that's the inflation rate. The cost of your eggs and milk will permanently be higher. So there's a lot of things that are happening. AI and job destruction. So you have all these things that are happening. Don't be surprised that they coalesce and amplify a curse. You just have to just listen to the news just for just maybe 10 minutes. And you start to sense that there's something bad emerging. Something bad is emerging. It's not going to be a pandemic. It's going to be something worse. It's going to be something where everything that you weren't thankful for, all the good in your life and you weren't thankful for, is going to be taken away from you. Your family, your kids, your well-being financially, your health, whatever it is, it's going to be taken from you.
Viruses can hide and hide silently. And I think this is another really important aspect of us understanding human-to-human transmission.
I want to return to a topic we were just talking about, because last night we spoke with Dr. Harangue, a former HHS Assistant Secretary. He believes we are not prepared for another pandemic. Let's take a listen to
never are.
Are we prepared for the next pandemic?
No.
Well, we're not. So, and we need to do a much better job. We've backslid, particularly in the last 18 months. So we have tremendous more to do. And I think everyone in this country knows why. In fact, what we just experienced over 5 or 6 years ago.
Do you agree with him? Have we backslid over the last 12, 18 months?
I think our relationship, our public health relationship to the public is more difficult than it was before COVID. But I can't say that we're, quote, not prepared, because we learned with COVID that the group that was really responsible for our success in being able to get PPE to nurses, be able to get test out to everyone. I mean, we were doing over 2 million tests a day, being able to get therapeutics and vaccines was all due to the innovation of our private sector. And I think government alone cannot be prepared, but government plus the private sector plus the public, that's the three-legged stool that we have to ensure that we're always strengthening and have good relationships with.
What is the biggest mistake, in your estimation, we made during the COVID response, and what needs to be fixed most urgently before the next pandemic?
I think that we knew how to control the virus through testing. In other words, there were several universities, many actually, that stayed open all through the fall of 2020. Their sports teams were active. In the summer of 2020, they were open the whole fall, and many of the high schools and K through 12 were open. And they were testing, finding the asymptomatic individuals, not waiting for symptoms. And they dramatically changed transmission in the schools. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to be proactive. And I think people got very frustrated by their children being quarantined when we could have used tests to keep them in the class.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our News Nation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based
All right, what we're going to do now is we're going to listen to Fox Live Now. Iran destroys military explosives as U.S. halts scheduled attacks.
Are you ready to feel good about your body? LifeMD can help. Get started at lifemd.com.
Navan, the #1 rated business travel platform, lets your team book work travel in one place. Flights, hotels, cars, while staying within budget. And of course, we do want to get to the latest on that right now as we follow several different developments. Iranian state media now reporting explosions on Iran's Keshem Island were not caused by strikes, but rather the disposal of explosives. Witness accounts began circulating on social media a short time ago, and the Israel War Room posted this right here on your screen saying, quote, initial report, Iranian media reports explosions on Keshem Island. Now, Iran International English posted the same via state media, but followed up with this post here on X. Several consecutive explosions heard on Iran's southern Keshem Island around midday Tuesday were caused by the disposal of unexploded ordnance, a provincial security official told state media. The deputy security governor of that province said specialist teams carried out an operation, and he urged the public not to worry and to ignore rumors on social media. All of these reports coming as Axios reports that President Trump plans to convene a meeting of his top national security advisors that's set for today to discuss potential military options against Iran. As always, there is so much to discuss here, so I do want to bring in Major Jerome Spielman, the former spokesperson for the Israel Defense Forces and New York Times best-selling author. He has a lot of titles and wears a lot of hats. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Thank you, Josh. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. And first off, I want to start by talking about these reports of explosions, because every time we hear something like that coming in out of Iran, there are questions about whether the U.S. or Israel or maybe both are carrying out another operation. Is that kind of what goes through your mind when you hear something like that?
I think we have to always have a healthy sense.
My take on it, Trump was supposed to hit Iran today, on Tuesday. All right. Yesterday, what he did mention was that he was going to postpone his strike by about 3 days, maybe more, depending on how negotiations happen. And this was due to the request of members of the GCC. So Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, UAE. And so Trump is kicking the can down the road. He should hit Iran. Stop wasting time. Because the more time he wastes, the closer to midterm elections you have, the more time that inflation is going to be baked in permanently. And if you don't open up the Strait of Hormuz, you're talking about not just higher gasoline prices, but higher prices with everything, and a lack of fertilizer for the crops for this year, on top of the El Nino issue. And this is what I mean. There's an amalgamation of different variables that are going to be working in tandem that is going to amplify a problem. If you look at any one of them, it's no big deal. The pathogens, no big deal. El Nino, no big deal. Individually, the fertilizer, a little bit of a big deal, but workable. All right, the Strait of Hormuz, problematic, but manageable. But when you add all of this up, plus whatever that could happen that we haven't seen yet, there's an emergent property that's taking place here. And this is what I call the world curse. And I believe that world curse is going to last from 9/11 of this year to the first week of October of next year. So it's going to be a year period. Unless we do something that helps these variables, the ones that I just mentioned, the ones that we don't even know yet, unless we do something that kind of brings down the amplification effects of these variables, I feel a curse coming. If Trump keeps on playing this game with Iran, he should just kill them. He should just bomb them and open up the strait. Will we take casualties? Probably. But the longer you wait on this, the more of a financial problem it's going to take. You're already seeing it in the bond market. The 30-year yield is at an all-time high since 2007. 10-year yields up. Well, that means the cost, that's a signal that bond traders are expecting inflation. And they're also worried about the debt of the country. And the higher the yields are, when we sell treasuries to the market, we're going to be paying higher interest, which makes it even more of a problem. So there's also a financial variable that's starting to arise that could work in tandem with these other variables and cause havoc for people. Trump is playing with fire here. And I don't think he really understands that the individual variables can be managed. But when you put them together, the ability to manage it diminishes.
Scrutiny. When Iran says anything, they have a propensity to lie, certainly when it serves them. Although I do think in this case, Josh, that we probably are looking at them exploding an ordinance that was dropped in that area. We have to understand that that island used to be a tourist island. It's located directly in the middle of Hormuz. But Iran, in trying to choke international shipping, turned that island from a tourism center into a military bastion. It would be like taking Ellis Island in New York, making all the tourists go out of the way so you could threaten every ship sailing into New York Harbor. And it makes sense because both Israel and the U.S. did strike that island. And I think in any future decision and discussion, it's going to have to involve Iran being dislodged from anything that can threaten shipping. And that island is one of the key choke points.
And of course, we're looking at a map here that kind of points out where Keshem Island is in relation to the Strait of Hormuz, which has been a big topic of discussion. When you look at all of this, what is the coordination right now likely like between the U.S. and Israel? I have to imagine that they are still in lockstep when it comes to exactly what happens next, carrying out the mission here against Iran and preventing them from having a nuclear weapon, but also reopening the Strait of Hormuz to everyone to get through.
You know, I think that this will go down in history as probably one of the greatest coordinations between any two militaries. And to put this in perspective, neither Israel or the U.S. is located near this area, where Israel's clearly in striking distance because Iran has launched many an array of ballistic missiles. But both the U.S. and Israel are fighting a terrorist entity that is not next door. And at the same time, the ability to coordinate both aerial forces, naval forces, ground forces, in the event that they would be used, intelligence, is on the most phenomenal level. And I think this will really stand up as really an icon, as a paradigm for the way warfare should be fought between allies. And it stems really because of the orders given down from the top by President Trump on one hand and Prime Minister Netanyahu on the other. You can see when two leaders really want to coordinate and they send that message down to the militaries, it can be done, which is why we've had very few losses in this entire war and casualties. Every loss, of course, is important, but it's because any other two armies doing this, I think it probably would have been much different. To drill this down, Josh, to the present day, there's no question that this is no longer a war that's just about proxies and just about nuclear weapons. It's about economic arteries. The Gulf now sees that they can never leave Iran in charge of an economic artery where it can just squeeze them. And Israel and the U.S. are coordinated. Hopefully Europe will come on board into securing that Hormuz will be an international waterway where you can't have a terrorist regime squeeze the life out of democracies whenever it wants to.
It's also important to note that a little less than 24 hours ago, we heard from President Trump as he posted on Truth Social, and essentially the gist of what he had to say was that strikes were actually planned by the U.S. on Iran today. However, due to some of the remarks, some of the pleas from the Gulf Arab countries, especially the allies there, that he's postponed those attacks, those strikes on Iran. What do you make of that overall to publicly kind of make that statement and let Iran know, hey, we were going to strike you today, but I guess we won't?
President Trump means business.
Does your PPC performance stink like a wet dog? I had someone here to help.
Yeah, thank you. This is the AdLabs 5000. The AdLabs 5000 offers better performance at a lower price.
So how hard is this thing here to use?
I'm glad you asked. You can get a profitable PPC campaign in just 3 steps. First, you toss in your campaign data.
President Trump means business, and Israel means business. We've shown that we mean business both in June 2025 and in March 2026. We are willing to do, both of our countries are willing to do what it takes to ensure that Iran does not have any nuclear weapons it can use to confront either of these countries. And at the same time, President Trump is incredibly responsible, and he's been giving Iran chance after chance to do this job themselves. He's asked a very simple thing: give up your enriched uranium, give up your nuclear program, and we can make Iran a rich country. We can help it achieve its potential in the Iranian people. But that regime is stubborn. And the reason they're stubborn, and we have to understand this in the West, is because they're ideologically dedicated to the destruction of Israel and the West. And it's very difficult to take people who are fanatics and have them think about the betterment of their citizens. But he's giving them the chance. If they do it, we can avoid a war, have peace in the region. And if they don't do it, I think the only way to move forward, and this has been said by both sides, will be with force to force them to give up the nuclear program, the ability to threaten the West.
And Jerome, this is actually a post from Reuters where it says U.S. President Trump said that he had paused a planned attack against Iran after Tehran sent a peace proposal to Washington, and that there was now a, quote, very good chance of reaching a deal limiting Iran's nuclear program. We've heard that time and time again. We're, of course, going to see how good that kind of plays out. But this is another big topic.
It's just another case of Trump's chickening out. I don't believe it. You know, he's not willing. He's afraid to do what he needs to do, and that is kick the shit out of Iran.
Russian President Vladimir Putin is traveling to China to meet with the Chinese President Xi Jinping. What does that tell us, especially just days after we saw President Trump meet there with Xi Jinping as well?
I mean, I think this is a clear response to the president meeting with Xi Jinping and Russia now getting very nervous that one of its partners that has enabled Russia to carry out their campaign against Ukraine, that is, Russia provides oil to China. China gives Russia desperately needed money for that country to continue its war against Ukraine. And the two of them are really in a pact along with North Korea and Iran, which is to some degree threatened much of the world. And I think what President Trump's visit with Xi Jinping did was it created economic cooperation. Obviously, let's make sure it actually comes to bear between the United States and China. And it got a commitment from China that they are not going to send military weapons and bombs to Iran. And that's a major shift. Russia's probably getting nervous that their tripartite axis of evil is breaking. And that's what I'm sure President Putin is going to try to mend. And at the end of the day, China will have to make a decision whether it's going to face more towards Russia, which is a failing demagogic regime, or face towards the West, towards the United States and Israel, and open up both economic benefits and look towards a brighter future.
And I want to pop this up on your screen. As we talk about the situation in the Middle East, you're looking at a live look over Beirut in Lebanon. Important to note that Israel has been carrying out attacks here on the Hezbollah terror group. Now, there is a peace deal of sorts, a ceasefire that's in effect between Israel and Lebanon, but not Hezbollah, not the terror group there. So we're seeing those strikes continue to happen. Can you kind of break down for folks out there what the latest is on that situation playing out between Israel and Hezbollah?
Josh, Hezbollah is daily not only threatening Israelis, they're killing Israelis. I can tell you in my own street where I live, a neighbor up the street, their daughter was supposed to get married in 1 month. The invitations had just been put out with a soldier, and that soldier was killed by a drone strike earlier this week. Horrible tragedy. Hezbollah is using drones and rockets to threaten northern Israel, which Israel has said from the moment we went into that agreement. Of course, the President of the United States understands that any threat towards the Israeli people has to be taken care of, and Hezbollah has to disarm. And so all of these actions, Israel's had a lot of patience, almost like the U.S. and Iran. First of all, we've asked the people of southern Lebanon to move out of the way. We've established a military barrier. We're disarming Hezbollah in the southern area. But if they threaten Israel north of the Litani, Israel has said that it will do what it takes to protect our people. And that's exactly what's taking place. However, at the end of the day, Josh, it really is going to be up to the Lebanese government to disarm Hezbollah. It's the Lebanese people who are suffering even more than the Israelis. And I think if we ask them in their heart of hearts, they're happy Israel has weakened Hezbollah, but we need them to step up to the plate, and we need the international community to support Lebanon to disarm Hezbollah now. Hezbollah is Iran. Make no difference about it. It's time to bring in a final decision that we're not going to allow Iran to operate via its terror proxies, and this is an important opportunity to take care of that.
Jerome Spielman, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here, helping to break down all of the latest developments. We definitely appreciate it. Is there anything we missed? Anything that you want to make sure to add about any?
That's the end of my broadcast. Please help support the work that I do. I give you a unique perspective. All these videos are for free. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the great products that I offer. It's also important to take home this message, and that is the Ebola outbreak is not a pandemic. The Hantavirus outbreak is not a pandemic. I'm concerned about Mpox, avian flu, and SARS platform. That's what I'm worried about. But there is research happening on the Hantavirus in Ebola that has gain of function. But I'm more concerned about this emergent property as we get closer to September 11, 2026, where it seems as though we're going into tumultuous times. So mankind isn't doing things right. And nature, God, karma, whatever, the cosmos, whatever word you want to use, there is something happening that is going to cause havoc for everybody in the world. That's the main point that I want to make. So please share the links and make sure you subscribe to all my channels. All the links are in the description of this video. And again, please go to my store and get the great products that I offer. Thank you for listening and have a nice day.